Two Pirates players' shocking scheme to hurt Ohtani in Game 1 uncovered. Pirates players faces harsh discipline. Some things in baseball are competitive. And some things cross a line that competition does not cover. What happened in Game 1 between the Pirates and the Dodgers is now being described as the second kind. Not a hard play. Not an aggressive approach. Not the kind of physical intensity that the sport has always made room for, because the sport understands that bodies collide and tempers run high, and the line between fierce and dangerous is not always visible in real time. This was something that people are now saying was planned. Two Pittsburgh Pirates players. A scheme. Shohei Ohtani as the target. And now the discipline that follows when baseball decides that what it witnessed was not competitive intensity but something that had no place on a professional field. The story did not begin with an announcement. It did not begin with a press conference or an official statement from the league office. It began the way these stories always begin. With people who were close enough to see what was happening starting to talk about what they saw. And what they saw was not accidental. Game 1 had the atmosphere of a game that meant something. The Dodgers and Pirates were not playing for October positioning in the traditional sense. But Shohei Ohtani was in the lineup. And when Ohtani is in the lineup, every game carries a weight that the standings alone cannot fully explain. Cameras follow him from the parking lot to the dugout. Every at-bat becomes its own separate event within the larger event. Every pitch thrown to him carries a significance that pitches thrown to other players simply do not carry. That attention is not something the people around baseball miss. The Pirates players did not miss it either. What is now being alleged is that two of those players entered Game 1 with something beyond a competitive game plan. The scheme, as it has been described by people familiar with the situation, was not about getting Ohtani out. It was not about limiting his production or neutralizing his impact on the game the way opposing teams legitimately try to neutralize dangerous hitters. It was about hurting him. That word sits differently than any other word in this conversation. Getting someone out is baseball. Limiting someone's impact is strategy. Hurting someone is something that has no category in the sport that does not end in consequences. And consequences are exactly what is coming. The details of the scheme began to surface through channels that these details typically surface through. People who were present. People who heard things that were said in spaces where people assumed they would not travel beyond those spaces. People who watched what happened during the game and then connected it to information they had received before the game began. The picture that emerged was deliberate. The two players identified in the scheme had allegedly communicated with each other before the game about how they intended to approach specific moments involving Ohtani. Not approach in the tactical sense that pitchers and catchers discuss before a game. Approach in a physical sense. In a sense that involved creating situations where Ohtani would be vulnerable to contact that went beyond what the game permitted. When the information reached the right people, the response was not slow. Baseball does not move quickly on everything. The sport has a pace that its critics have always found frustrating and its admirers have always found meditative. Investigations, reviews, procedural steps. These things take the time they take. But when the allegation involves a coordinated effort to physically harm the most watched player in the sport, the pace changes. The league office began its review before the series had finished. The Dodgers organization was informed of the situation through the appropriate channels. The response inside the organization, according to people familiar with those internal conversations, was not calm. It was not calm because the nature of the allegation made calm difficult to maintain. Shohei Ohtani is not simply a player on the Dodgers roster. He is the player around whom the entire organizational identity has reorganized itself. The contract. The preparation. The two-way usage plan that Roberts and his staff have built the season around. Every decision made at the highest levels of the Dodgers organization factors in Ohtani's health, his workload, his availability for the games that matter most. To learn that two opposing players had allegedly entered a game with a plan to compromise that health was not something that the organization processed quietly. Dave Roberts faced the cameras with an expression that was different from his usual post-game composure. The difference was subtle. But it was there. In the set of his jaw. In the way he chose his words more carefully than usual. In the slight pause before certain sentences that suggested he was filtering something before it reached the microphone. A reporter asked him directly whether he had been briefed on the allegations. Roberts nodded slowly. He said he was aware of the situation. He said the league was handling it through the appropriate process. He said he had full confidence that the people responsible for making decisions in situations like this one would make the right decisions. Then he stopped. And the room understood that he had said everything he was going to say on the subject through official channels. But his face said considerably more. The two players at the center of the allegation were not named publicly in the initial reports. That is the standard protocol when an investigation is ongoing. Names travel faster than facts. Conclusions arrive before evidence. The league office understood that releasing names before the process was complete would create a situation that no one could fully control. But inside the game, the names were not a mystery. Players talk. Coaches talk. The people who exist within the daily rhythms of professional baseball share information in ways that rarely make it to official statements but shape the understanding of everyone within the environment. By the time the league office had confirmed that a formal review was underway, the people closest to the situation already knew more than the public statements contained. What those people described was a level of premeditation that made the allegation heavier than a single moment of poor judgment on a baseball field. This was not a player who got caught up in a competitive moment and made a decision he should not have made. This was not the kind of incident that gets reviewed and results in a conversation about intensity and professional responsibility. This was allegedly planned. Discussed. Coordinated between two people who had decided before the game began that the normal rules of competition did not apply to how they intended to approach Shohei Ohtani. That distinction matters enormously when it comes to what happens next. The discipline that is coming has been described by people familiar with the league's thinking as significant. Significant is a word that covers a range of outcomes in baseball's disciplinary language. It can mean a handful of games. It can mean a number that changes a player's season in a meaningful way. It can mean something that follows a player's professional record in ways that affect how they are perceived inside the game for years after the incident itself has faded from the daily conversation. In this case, the people describing the likely outcome as significant are not using the word carelessly. The combination of factors involved pushes this situation toward the more serious end of what the league's disciplinary process can produce. The premeditation. The coordination between two players. The identity of the intended target. The moment in the season. All of it factors into a calculation that the league office makes when it decides what response is proportionate to what occurred. Suspension is the word being used in the conversations that are happening in the spaces where these conversations happen before they become official. Not a short suspension. Not the kind that gets served over a meaningless stretch of games and causes minimal disruption. The kind that removes players from their team during a portion of the season that matters. The kind that sends a message not just to the two players involved but to everyone else in the sport who might ever consider that a coordinated scheme to harm another player was something the league would treat as anything other than a serious violation of everything professional baseball is supposed to stand for. Ohtani, for his part, was briefed on the situation by the Dodgers organization. How he processed that information is not something that was made public. Ohtani does not perform his private responses for the cameras. He never has. There is a quality to the way he carries himself through the external noise of being who he is in this sport that suggests a person who has developed a very clear boundary between what belongs to the public and what belongs to him. But the people around him noticed something. In the days following Game 1, in the practices and the preparation and the ordinary daily rhythms of being a baseball player in the middle of a long season, there was a focus about him that the people who watch him closely described as sharper than usual. Not angrier. Not distracted by what he had learned. Sharper. The kind of focus that arrives when a person has been reminded of something important. When external information recalibrates the internal attention in a direction that is ultimately about the work rather than the noise surrounding it. He went about his preparation. He went about his at-bats. He went about the business of being Shohei Ohtani in the middle of a baseball season with the same commitment that has defined every previous chapter of his career. The scheme had not touched him. Not in the way the people behind it had intended. And in that fact alone, there was something worth noticing. Don Kelly was asked about the situation at his next available media session. He was not asked gently. The reporters in that room had the information that reporters in that room had, and they asked the questions that information demanded. Directly. Without much cushioning around the edges. Kelly sat with it for a moment. His expression was not the one he had worn after the game when his players had gathered around Ohtani in that genuine and unplanned moment of admiration. That expression had been open. Moved. The expression of a man surprised by something beautiful. This expression was different. Heavier. Tighter around the edges. The expression of a man who was sitting in front of a situation he could not fully defend and knew it. He said that he could not speak to an ongoing investigation. He said that the league process existed for exactly these situations and that he respected that process. He said that his organization's values did not include what was being alleged and that if the investigation confirmed what was being alleged, the response would be appropriate. He said all of that carefully and correctly. And then he said one more thing. He said that Shohei Ohtani deserved to play this game without being a target of anything other than competitive baseball. He said it simply. Without decoration. And he did not add anything after it. Because there was nothing to add. Some lines in baseball do not require long explanations of why they should not be crossed. They just should not be crossed. And when they are, the sport has a responsibility to make clear exactly what that costs. That clarity is coming. For two Pittsburgh Pirates players, it is coming very soon.